Hey, I'm John F. Gately, and today we're going to look at two approaches to stifle free speech in America. The first one comes from Matt Taibbi in a release of Twitter files, and the second one comes from Washington State. Let's take a look. And today's Twitter file report from Matt Taibbi, as I said, focuses on the Global Education Center, which is a department located in the State Department, but receives 90% of its funding from the Pentagon. So as we scroll down to, in this thread here, we're going to scroll down to tweet number 2, where in June of 2021, the Atlantic Council, which is an entirely different organization, that is a supposed non-profit, so not part of the government, theoretically, that is sending a list of 40,000 Twitter accounts that they suspect of inauthentic behavior and Hindu nationalism more broadly. So that's really weird. Why would the Atlantic Council Digital Forensic Research Lab be sending this research report to Twitter to get 40,000 accounts basically suspended? Because effectively, the Atlantic Council is an arm of the federal government. Yeah, so they get money from the federal government as well. See how that works? They get money from the Global Education Engagement Center. They get money from the Global Engagement Center to do the Pentagon's dirty work. That's basically what's happening. You see, the Pentagon can't do that type of stuff for domestic misinformation, but a third-party nonprofit couldn't do it. See, they're just like washing it. That's all that's being happening here. And Twitter, Yoel Roth, that's how you pronounce his name, I think, to his credit, was like, most of these people have nothing to do with India or Hindu nationalism. Bobby is a Reagan Republican from Connecticut. Lady DY816, she's never left New Jersey. These people are insane, said Krista Woods. And yeah, so they did a spot check, and they found that most of these accounts appear to be all virtual, real people, not bots, and nothing to do with Hindu nationalism in any way, shape, or form. Now, as I just mentioned, the Atlantic Council gets most of its money from the Global Engagement Center, which again is 90% funded by the Pentagon. But no, they refute that any of the tax money to track Americans, saying its grants have an exclusively international focus. Okay. One of the guys is unconvinced. This is un-American, says Urbink, who immigrated from Castro's Cuba. They do this in places that don't believe in free speech. Who was on the list? Maricel Urbanik. So as Twitter pushed back on this type of request, to their credit, the Global Education Engagement Center and the Atlantic Council took a different approach. Instead, they started to drop a dime to, as Matt Taibbi says, the slower animals in the journalism herd. That's a good line, Matt Taibbi. And basically sicked these lazy reporters on Twitter. So let's gin up some AstroTurf news and get Twitter to do something that they don't want to do. The Global Engagement Center was originally created in the last year of the Obama administration, so that would have been like 2015, and its original target was ISIS and ISIS information or misinformation on the internet. But that has morphed over time, just like Reagan says. You hear me say it at times. Mission creep plus the never what is that phrase? Nothing closer to never-ending life than a government program. So sorry, I goofed that one up today. But basically, Twitter comms official Ian Plunkett wrote years ago that misinformation, like countering violent extremism, is becoming a cottage industry. In other words, what I'm trying to say is you start off with an agency that's focused on ISIS, and then it metastasizes into an agency that gives grants, basically laundering money to a nonprofit to do intelligence work in the United States that the Pentagon itself couldn't do on its own because we have, laws against that. Disinformation is the counterterrorism mission rebranded for domestic targets. Basically, they're taking what they were doing against ISIS and now they're farming it out to nonprofit, like Atlantic Council, probably a lot of others, to do the same thing against us. So that's like a federal thing that's happening or happened relative to controlling our free speech. Now, next comes from Washington State. Thank you, Jason Rantz, for this report about how the Attorney General in Washington State wants to make misinformation a public health issue. Check it out. Rantz, AG pushing most dangerous bill in legislative history. You know Jason Rantz, he's on Fox News quite a bit, and hosts a radio program in Washington State. And this is a very big threat because what they're doing, what these progressives are doing, are taking everything they learned about how to control the population during the pandemic and now using that to control speech in the United States.
We start with sort of addressing that this report really thought about using a public health approach, and that's very innovative in the state of Washington, but also innovative across the country. And when we say a public health approach, we mean sort of addressing all of domestic violent extremism from what is rooted in community need, the holistic perspective of it, relying on evidence-based intervention, and focusing on building resilient systems.
Oh God, make it stop, please. First off, you'll notice that they're no longer calling it domestic terrorism because that's racist. And she's also talking about violence, Jack. She's talking about violence. She's not talking about free speech. Oh, but the Washington State Attorney General is. When he got interviewed for PBS, he's absolutely positively using this approach to talk about and regulate your free speech in an evidence-based system. So that makes it fine, right?
I think a definition of domestic terrorism at the federal level is a useful starting point, but it focuses strictly on sort of threats of bodily harm, of killing somebody, for example.
That would be a law enforcement response, which would be absolutely appropriate, whether the violence comes from the left or the right, it doesn't matter. But they don't want that. They want to do like a pre-crime. They want to restrict your First Amendment and probably also your Second Amendment rights before you actually do anything.
Which from our perspective is simply too narrow for the great threat that we see with the increase of radicalization, for example. So we're trying to broaden that term to address things that are not specifically a threat to somebody, but where the state can take some action and prevention, for example.
Take your guns, seize your social media accounts.
Take a more holistic approach, a public health approach.
A public health approach because we saw how effective that was when we couch our arguments in public health. Then we can do all sorts of things and also grab additional emergency powers. Not everybody in Washington State is buying this. Check this lady out.
This Orwellian bill would cause Washingtonians, including parents, nurses, doctors, and vulnerable and marginalized communities, to be afraid of expressing their opinions or of speaking misinformation for fear of being labeled or penalized as a domestic violence extremist.
After all, what is misinformation? A couple of years ago, it was saying that the virus came from a lab. Now that's not misinformation. The FBI director just said it the other day. And what is being anti-government? I'm from Massachusetts. I remember all sorts of people driving around here with bumper stickers that said resist. And dissent is patriotic. Used to see those all over the place. They're anti-government. You know, the very essence of being an American is that you can address your concerns to the government. And you can say, hey, government, you're doing a bad job. Whatever it happens to be, whether it's trash collection or war or whatever, you can complain and not have to face a chilling effect against your speech. Look at how dismissive the AG in Washington is of this woman's testimony.
What's your response to that concern?
Yeah, well, of course, we have public hearings for a reason to hear all voices, and our state legislature is no different than any state legislature. We have all sorts of voices at the table.
His basic answer is, yeah, we let all sorts of kooks testify. Yeah, if we had this bill, maybe we wouldn't have to listen to these people.
The bottom line is you really can't trust the people that say democracy's on the ballot. You can count on me. We're here to save democracy. Or the other approach, which is just give us more power and we'll keep you safe. You can't trust those people. But hopefully you already knew that. I'm John F. Gately from Plymouth, America's hometown in Massachusetts. Behind enemy lines, have a great day. Bye-bye.